I'm no star, but thanks for making me feel like one. That was special. You know, we say this at the start of almost every one of these events, but I think now more than ever, I mean it. This has to be one of the most attractive crowds that I've ever seen. I mean, how do you do it 6:30 on a Thursday? That's not easy. Coming here, then drinking wine, then eating pizza, all of the pizza, mind you. So, we're going to get these guys up in a second, but I have to do a bit of admin. So where should I start? Oh, okay, I'll tell you who I am. I'm Connor. I work here in Google, and I'm one of the people that runs InterTech. How many people have been to one of these events before? Just a show of hands. Wow, a lot of new people. That's really great. So I'll tell you what it is. For those of you who are uninitiated, you are now initiated and indoctrinated. But InterTech is a diversity forum. And it's kind of a coalition of different tech companies. Right now, it is Google, LinkedIn, Zalando, and Amazon. And what those companies do is they give us support in terms of resources, human, financial, otherwise, and they help us to achieve what we have in terms of our goals. And those are threefold. So the first is to do social good, and we do that by supporting an organization called Shout Out, which are, oh, wow, you're here. You're really here. Clap, clap. And they do pretty astounding work going into secondary schools in Ireland and teaching kids that it's okay to be on the LGBT spectrum wherever you are, and how to be really good allies. So we run fundraisers like that at the end of every year, and we'll have one in December. So that's the first thing. The second thing is pretty straightforward, being kind of a social network, not in the terms of Facebook, but in the old-fashioned sense where you reach out and you shake someone's hand and you have a drink and you ask what they do, that really traditional sense, you know? And then we focus on community development, which is more what we're doing here tonight, which is trying to have meaningful conversations. And what really worked the last time we did this, which was an event called No Fats, No Femmes, discussed inter-LGBT discrimination and how we can be a little bit nicer to one another from time to time, was the fact that we had so much audience engagement, and we had lots of time for Q&A at the end, and that's something that we're going to replicate here tonight. So we need a couple of things before we get started. We need 4 things, in fact. The first thing is, we need a hot audience. We have that, right? Oh, come on. Do we have that? Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. Paying you a compliment. Second thing we need, do you know what would be great, actually, if we had somebody who's been kind of fighting their whole lives for the liberation of the LGBT people in Ireland. It would also be really great if he was the founder of Gay Community News, one of the best magazines out there in Dublin for the gays. It would be also great if he was the curator of the Irish Queer Archive, and I think we have that in Tonie Walsh. So, number one. Hey.
What's it down here?
Yeah, absolutely. Wherever. Not there. That's my seat. So this is like a teaser trailer, right? One by one. The second thing we need is, do you know what would be great if we had a substance abuse lead from 50 Dean Street, one of the best sexual health clinics in the UK, who really knows his shit, and his life is also impacted personally by the HIV narrative. And we have that in David Stewart.
Hi.
Yeah, I think we're good to go. No, we have one more thing that we need. We need a national fucking treasure, and we have that in Rory O'Neill.
This is totally fake. We already met.
Okay, so I'll sit down here. So I have some questions, but I just want you guys to know that as stuff strikes you, really try and remember it for the end, because we'll have one of these, this mic actually, which I can throw into the audience at you guys, and you can throw around and ask questions of these guys and have a bit of a reflection of what we're going to talk about. But I'm going to start off with David, because over the last 10 days, we've had some really good news coming out of the UK, and specifically 50 Dean Street. So maybe let's start there.
Okay, historic news. You might have heard about it, but we've had an 80% reduction in HIV infections amongst gay men in London. That's historic. And to put it into context, in 2015, we were diagnosing about 70 to 80 people with HIV every month. And that had been the case for the last 10 years, in fact, increasing every year. And suddenly last year, it dropped to about 10 or 11 a month. And it looks consistent. And it is historic.
Yeah.
It's not just, it looks like that was particularly 5016 Street. It looks like it's being replicated in other clinics in London too, also some clinics in Australia. So it might be a movement that will be reflected here as well very soon if we all do our jobs well. And when I say jobs, I don't mean in healthcare. I mean as awesome gay men looking after ourselves, looking after our community, and having great sex that's reflective of our sense of self-worth and our partners.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So that's great progress, but I guess to get more of an insight into where we are now, we need to cast time back a little bit. So I was wondering if you could tell us about when you guys were diagnosed and what was that was like for you guys. Who wants to go first?
Well, before I tell you when I was diagnosed, I suppose I should actually mention how I was diagnosed. And it's always a bit difficult. Well, first of all, it's it shouldn't be nobody's business about how we get diagnosed.
Absolutely.
Because inevitably, if we start a conversation, we go down the route of sort of hierarchy of victimhood and everything else. It doesn't serve us any good. And we saw where that got us in the 80s when we had the IV drug users and the hemophiliacs and the homos. And of course, we are on the bottom of the pile, as we usually are, and receiving a whole load of social opprobrium. But I felt, for some of you who've been sort of following my trajectory the last year, I've done a couple of interviews where I've actually opened up about how I became positive, because I actually think it touches on some of the wider issues that we discuss around developing a sort of more holistic sexual health education, sexual health culture. And I bring it all down to a very simple thing of how we negotiate desire and intimacy. And in my case, of course, how I negotiated desire and intimacy on the day I became positive was skewered because I was actually raped. And of course, that touches on the whole issue of consent, which I think needs to be part of a wider discourse that's maybe not for tonight, obviously. I don't want to keep this conversation too grim, but I do think we need to sort of, at some point, in the context of talking about how we negotiate desire and intimacy, open it up to issues of consent, and then by extension sort of admit that within the LGBT community, things like domestic abuse happens, things like rape happens, things like assaults happen, and all of that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But so that's me. So I picked up a guy in the Gresham Hotel, of all places, the Gresham Hotel, and he wanted to have sex with me in what I call Gotham Alley, the lane behind the Savoy and the Gresham, and I'm going, for fuck's sake, give over, I just live across the street. So I brought him home, and we had great sex, and I was raped. And then sometime later, I got really sick, as one does, and rocked up to, this is 2005. Mm-hmm. The shame of becoming positive at 45. But anyway, so I rocked up to James's Hospital and said, give me a HIV or a hepatitis test. And the nurse is looking at me startled and going, what? I said, yeah, I've definitely got it. And she says, how do you know? I said, listen, love, I was trying not to patronize her. I said, look, I've lost over 40 friends and lovers to full-blown AIDS over the years. I've either got hepatitis or HIV. I need a test. Anyway, got the test, called back sometime later. And it's actually, she's a really good friend of mine, Grania Courtney, wonderful consultant in the Guide Clinic. And she said, we're in there, and then there's a counsellor. And the minute I saw the counsellor, I'm going, okay, it's not good news. And she's going, yeah, we've got your results, you're positive. And of course, the first thing is there's this numb shock. But in my case, having survived what I call the war period between 1984 and 1996, when too many of our friends and lovers died, that numb shock was sort of tempered by a certain relief and resignation. Now, what I mean by relief is that, if you survived, there was a period when our friends were dying, and lovers, that we always imagined we were going to be the next person. We were going to be the next person. And it was this, it was just a constant state of paralytic fear and anxiety. We're going to be the next person, no matter what we're doing, no matter how safe we're going to be the next person. And then when that doesn't happen, and so many of your friends die, and so many of your friends die, and it doesn't happen, and the years go on, there's that, I suppose you could call it survivor guilt, or some sort of residue of guilt that you didn't get positive. I mean, it's a twisted form of thinking. You know, there's that sort of weird guilt that, oh wow, I survived and I didn't become positive. So when the news happened at the age of 45, when I'm able to take advantage of all the new fabulous antiretrovirals that are in place, it was like, okay, yeah, whatever. And the counsellor's there, and she's going, now, are you okay? If there's anything I can do for you, and I'm looking at my watch going, I'm late for work. If there's anything I can do, and I'm going, thanks very much. Anyway, I left James's, and it was on my bike, and I remember cycling down to the Lewis stop, and I just had this urge to scream to everybody at the Lewis stop that I'm HIV positive! I'm HIV positive! I didn't. And, and then I get up to POZ. I was working with Rory, and I get up to POZ, and Rory's going, where the fuck have you been? You're hours late. And I said, oh, up in James's, got my results. And he's going, and? A bit unnecessarily. And I'm going, and? I'm going, yeah, I'm positive. And without missing a heartbeat, it goes, about fucking time.
In my defense.
But actually, going back to what I was just saying earlier on about carrying that residue of survivor guilt and everything, Rory absolutely, fundamentally, perfectly judged the place that I found myself in at the time. You know, having come through that war, it was, and being in a situation where we now have a whole new fabulous dispensation at our medical dispensation at our disposal. It's wonderful. We can live ordinary lives. You know,
It's fantastic.
yeah.
David, do you want to let us know how you became?
Yeah, I want to try and look at the age average in the audience before I go on, because I have to take it back 30 years. And it was, what was the math? So I was about 20. I was working as an escort in London. And this is an interesting story. For me, I had a lot of sex with a lot of clients, but I was always safe with my clients because that wasn't fun, you know what I mean? I was working. I've got a good work ethic. But also a very, really, really shy, closeted, strange kind of guy, despite the fact that I was working as an escort. And in the 3 years that I was seeing about 3 clients a day, in the 3 years that I was doing that, I had sex with 3 guys for personal choice during that time, which I find a huge kind of disparity. And with one of those guys, somebody came in my ass, and it was awesome. It was exactly what I wanted. I was very young. I felt intimidated, but I wanted him to like me enormously. I really wanted him to like me, and I was in such a horny mood, and I liked him so much, and I didn't talk about condoms at all. And I wish I had, yeah. I wish I had because that was the time when there was no medicines. So I became very, very, I was fine for about 4 or 5 years. And then I started to get very sick. So those pictures that you see from the dark ages, they're very young, you know. Those black and white pictures from the 80s when you see the AIDS victims in hospital beds, I looked like that. But the wards were so full. And what was wrong with me was I had a thing called CMV, cytomegalovirus, which is a kind of a virus that makes you go blind. And you have to have injections into your eyeball every day to try to keep your sight. And I lost one eye, and I was losing the other. I had another thing called molluscum contagiosus, so these pussy sores that were all over the left side of my face, all over my fingers. I'd have to get on the tube every day in this state to go to the hospital to have my injection into my eye. I'd have to get off at every tube station to vomit into a rubbish bin before they removed the rubbish bins from the tube. Because of the IRA, I think.
Sorry.
I had to get off at every station to vomit and try to hold my vomit in between on the journey until I got to the hospital, and the same thing on the way back, and every day. And that was, because none of these things were life-threatening, I was dying slowly, but none of those things were life-threatening. So my drip that I had to do every day for 2 hours had to be done at home because the hospital wards were so full of people who were actually dying like that day or that week, and I probably wasn't going to die for another year. That was what kind of life was like back then. But then, the medicines were invented. Within a month, I was gorgeous. And I was gorgeous and everything was fine. I just got on with life, except I can't pretend for a minute that I wasn't monumentally traumatized by that experience of 8 years of even little things like when you go to the dentist and they say, would you like the quick fix or the more expensive long-term one? It's like, I'll take the short one. I think when you go to a gym membership and you're expecting to die within a year and they say, do you want it a year or do you want to buy the month? Like, buy the month. They say, but it's cheaper if you buy it by the year. And I'm like, I won't be here. And so those things don't just vanish because you get well. And of course, we didn't know I was going to live for a long time because it felt like a reprieve. So in that trauma, I did a whole lot of drugs, which is kind of how I got my job now as an addictions expert. Is that how you
Substance abuse lead.
Yeah, chemsex. I invented the word chemsex. But I got into chemsex, and it was trauma.
Sorry, for the straights in the audience, you have to tell them what chemsex is.
Okay, like the way I did that?
Yeah.
Chemsex is the use of 3 particular drugs: crystal methamphetamine, methadone, and GHB or GBL, used specifically by gay men in sexual contexts. It's absolutely related to gay hookup culture, the introduction of technology that changed our sex lives dramatically, and the HIV trauma within this community too. So chemsex is globally in the developed world one of the main contributors to the HIV epidemic. And in fact, one of the reasons we've been so successful in London is because we've had brilliant chemsex support, really addressing that very, very high-risk population. I can't talk about AIDS anymore. Rory.
God, mine's a really fun story. I came of age, during the 80s when there was all the ads on the TV, warning you about it, so I was very aware of it. I lost quite a number of friends. I met Tonie Walsh at an AIDS funeral. He looked like an Apache Indian at the time. He had long black hair and a scar down his face. So I was very well aware, but like everybody, sometimes you get caught up in the fun of things, and somewhere along the way, I had unprotected sex. And eventually in 1995, I started to feel unwell, and I went to my doctor, and he said, oh, well, it could be A, B, C, and D, and we'll just do the HIV test. And then he called me back a couple of days later, and he asked me to come in at 5 p.m. on a Friday, which I now know is a really bad sign, because he doesn't want there to be other people outside waiting. If he's going to, he doesn't want you to be there at 3 p.m. and to be, women outside with bunions waiting while you're inside crying or whatever, So I go there and he says, all right, just come back positive. And, yes, it was a shock. I wasn't expecting it because I think I still, although I was a little older, I wasn't 16 anymore, but I still sort of had that, I'm invincible, thing about it. So it was a shock, but I've always been the kind of person who just gets on with it, I think. And people always want me to say, oh, it changed my life. And from then on, I've lived every day as if it's been my last, and I appreciate the flowers and all that shite. But none of that is true. Absolutely none of that is true, because the next day you still have to take the bins out. You still run out of toilet paper, and somebody has to go to the supermarket, so you can't be just sort of smelling the flowers or wrapped at home in a ball in the corner crying or whatever. So life just continues on. The banalities of life just drag you through, whatever. Now, I was open from it with my friends from the very beginning, and sometimes people say, oh, that was kind of quite brave of you, whatever. But it wasn't at all. It's because I have a big mouth, and I can't, keep these things in. So I was telling everybody, Tony said, oh, hi, Tony, I got AIDS yesterday, and like Tony, I had this temptation to tell strangers, I really want whatever. But I wasn't publicly open about it for a couple of years. But there then came a point, and this ties into what I said to Tony when he was diagnosed, there came a point where I felt that what was really pissing me off about it was the inability to talk openly about it. I was lucky, so I was diagnosed in 95, and by a year later, good drugs started to arrive. And so I have always felt, from day one really, that I've been on this little conveyor belt that's just been getting better. When I was diagnosed the first day, that you get sent to the clinic, and at the clinic on that first day, they had the counsellor there, and she's there to tell me that I can get a blanket allowance because I'm never going to be able to work again. All the things that they can do for me, and the government supplements I can get, and all this kind of stuff. And I felt like saying, I think you've got the wrong person. I felt like I was been accused in a lineup for murder and they'd mistaken me for somebody else, because I felt fine. But very quickly then they start saying, oh, there's this new drug and it seems quite good, and then the drugs got better and better. So I have always felt like it's on an upward trajectory. So I've never felt horribly, grimly depressed about it. But there came a point that the thing that was really pissing me off about it was the inability to just be normal about it. Like, if you have cancer, you can make a cancer joke. And that gets something out. It makes you feel a little bit better. You can laugh at something. It's not so fearful in some way. And the fact that nobody could talk about it meant that everybody else is afraid of it, which makes them then afraid of you because you have it. So I then made this conscious decision, I'm going to make fucking jokes about it. I make jokes about every other thing in my life, so why can't I joke about this? So I started to write jokes about it, for panty and stuff, and I would treat it like any other shit that happens to you in regular conversation. And sometimes people would give out to me, and I'd say, it's my fucking disease, so it's my choice to talk about it any way that I bloody well want. And that is partly why, I don't remember exactly why I said exactly that to Tonie, but it was tied up with the fact that Tonie Walsh should have had AIDS, as far as I was concerned. Like, he is older than me, and he's been in every, dirty Amsterdam bar, that there's known to man. So, I'm like, of course Tonie must have it. So there's a survivor's guilt thing that I get, with Tonie. But if I had turned around to Tonie and started burst into tears and started hugging him, when I was living fine, it would have been ridiculous. The truth is, you get on with life, you laugh at these things and then take some of the power out of them. And I knew that Tonie would get that. So the first thing I said to Tonie was, about fucking time. I made a joke about it. And I don't want to be airy-fairy about it, because I am the kind of person, give me all the drugs. I don't believe in you can think your way out of things. I don't believe that Oprah can ask and you'll get it. I don't believe any of that stuff. I do believe in all the drugs. Give me the drugs, give me the drugs. But I will say that it is easier to fight these things if you have a positive attitude about it. And having a sense of humour about it, and not being afraid to talk about it, and not treating it like it's some sort of shameful, horrible thing that you're carrying around, has enabled me to have a totally positive attitude about it. And I think that has made me, deal with it better.
Okay. And I think that's the ideal world, your view of it and your perspective of it. But from the experience of an awful lot of people, and I think I'd count myself as one of them, our community still attaches a stigma to being positive.
Absolutely it does. It absolutely does. But there would be less of a stigma if we all treated it a little bit more lightly. Yeah. I appreciate it's a very serious thing. And I'm, one of the only, if you're living down in Mullingar and you get diagnosed today, who do you know that has HIV? You know me. Yeah. So I get the letters and the emails and the people that sidle up to me, in the bar or whatever. And regularly, 2, 3, 4 times a month, somebody will come up and tell me. And so I have these conversations with these people, and some of these conversations are incredibly sad. Lonely people down the country have never told a single person. They've never told a family member. They've never told a friend. They've never told anybody. They're living alone with this thing. And it has become this enormous, giant, huge thing to them. And all they want to be able to do is have a conversation about it, and they end up having the conversation with me. So I'm aware that there is all that stigma. And I'm aware that suggesting that everyone just treat it lightly, including all the people who've been diagnosed, I'm aware that's very easy for me to say. I'm a different kind of personality or whatever, maybe my family or whatever. I don't have particular worries. But the honest truth is, the reason that Ireland voted for marriage equality 2 years ago is because gay people came out. Over the last 30 years, gay people came out. And it was gay people coming out that changed this country and changed this country's attitude to gay people. Because it was easy to have prejudices against people that they didn't know. It's very difficult to hold prejudices against people that are sitting beside you at work and are teaching your kids or whatever. So coming out changed this country. And if every single person living with HIV in this country today stood up and announced to everybody that they're living with HIV and were open about it at work and in school and in college and at home with their families, the truth is that stigma would be decimated overnight. So I realize that's a huge ask, and I'm not saying everybody can do that, and it's easy for me to say that, but I am saying that bluntly, that is the truth. Yeah. We could end stigma now if every single person living with HIV in this country stood up and just was open about it. In the same way that they would be if they were diagnosed with leukemia or something.
Rory's right about that, because I get randomers messaging me on Facebook, through Facebook, wanting to talk about their status or wanting to talk about the fact that they've just become positive, or they've been dealing with it in some practical way, or they haven't been dealing with it. And the only reason they choose to actually contact me is because they've seen me sort of gobbing off about it somewhere in the newspaper, or some do or whatever.
And all of that kind of hiding and having to message somebody you don't know, well, it's a good coping strategy, means that that stigma is still very real, even though it shouldn't exist. And one of the things that I think would be helpful in order for us to get over that is to understand how it manifests itself in your lives. So the basic things, like dating, like how does this spring up?
Can I say just very quickly on a much bigger level, whatever about how we approach it sort of individually and as a community, Irish society needs to own the fact that we have been the product of a very penitential type of Roman Catholicism that's quite unlike anything that you have experienced over the last 2,000 years in Spain, Italy, or Portugal, or Greece, the other, big Roman Catholic, traditional big conservative Roman Catholic countries. But here, maybe it's something to do with the weather back in the Middle Ages or whatever, or the lack of availability of wolf skin, bear skins or whatever. But we've developed this penitential attitude to sex, sexuality, and our bodies. So some of it's the environment as well. You're not going to feel good about your body if you don't get enough opportunity to take your clothes off. And
there will be time for that later.
but it is quite interesting. I think we're sloughing it off, and since the sex abuse scandals of the early 90s, which, by the way, also helped puncture the lingering stereotype of a gay man being the sort of sexual predator, child abuse, and everything. That stereotype was binned when we realised when the sex abuse scandals in the church imploded. But I do think we need to sort of address this lingering attitude that's informed by religiosity around sexuality, around sex, around sexual expression. Because it's still there. People, and it plays out in a myriad of ways. It plays out in the fact that we don't have a proper comprehensive sex education culture in our schools or whatever.
Well, I wouldn't want to go too far. I wouldn't want to be German about it, because I think a little Catholic guilt is good for sex. It makes it more exciting and dirty. I don't want to be German about it and everybody masturbating over lunch. I want there to be a little bit of shame about it, just a little, because it feels good.
Shame is good, yeah. But I'm going to ask it again. How does it manifest itself most commonly in your life?
I have an example. It doesn't really manifest in my life at all because I'm too old.
Yeah.
And I just haven't fucked with it for a long, long time. But there was a time, I know that my patients, I see a whole lot of patients, and I see how it manifests in their lives every day. I see it contributing to drug use. I see it contributing to having sex with anyone on Grindr just because if they try too hard to get the right one, they've got to negotiate all of this stigma and rejection and stuff. I see people not come forward to get tested, even though they've had loads of possible HIV risks, because they're so terrified of what that diagnosis means. And what that diagnosis means is they'll be medicated and live well and be happy. But no, what it means to them is people won't want to shag them, they'll be rejected online, they'll feel diseased when they're having sex. I mean that in inverted commas. I know that, like I said, I haven't bothered for a long time, but I have a single memory of when it really stood out for me. I think it was before Grindr. It must have been Gaydar, which was new at the time and amazing. But and I was learning that online hooking up thing. I knew how to pull someone in a bar. I'm an escort. I know how to pull someone in a bar. But how to have that conversation on Gaydar was doing my head in completely. But anyway, some guy said, I was from day one, I'm positive and I don't give a fuck, like me or fuck off. It was a bit like that. It was hard to say that on Grindr though, on Gaydar. What I did say was, somebody said, "Are you clean?" And I was like, I knew what he meant. I said, "Yeah, I just had a shower." Blah blah blah. And he said, there was this really long pause. 20 minutes. Now, when you're talking online, 20 minutes is a really long time when you're like this, when your hard-on's full and you need to go to the toilet, but you're still waiting there for the response.
Gaydar days, your dial-up modem was still...
I know what I mean. And his response eventually was, "Oh, hi, dude." He lost me there. "Hi, dude. Listen, I'm a medical student and I don't want to jeopardize my career." And that's when I thought, like, okay, oh my God, I really want to go to town on this guy. I rehearsed in my head the response about how I wasn't planning to ruin his medical career. I wasn't planning to have infectious sex with him, a whole lot of things. But I just couldn't be bothered. But, you know, even though that ended the situation, I didn't have sex for about 2 years after that, because I really didn't. At the time, I just thought I can't be bothered. But in retrospect, that fucked me up. It kind of did. I just didn't want that again, because I felt I've lied in bed with people and felt diseased. I've lied in bed with people and we're having amazing sex and kissing, and I'm looking in their eye and I'm wondering, are you thinking about HIV? Because everything is safe, but you're thinking, is it safe, even though you know it is? And I can see you thinking about that just by looking in your eyes. Or is that me being defensive and wondering that? And just don't do it. Just give it up for a while. It seems easier. That's how stigma impacted me.
I didn't have sex with anybody for well over a year after my diagnosis, because at the time, it just seemed like such a big thing to have to deal with. And the first guy I did have sex with afterwards, as soon as we finished sex, I ended up telling him and then sitting on his bed crying, which was more embarrassing and more awful. And then he became the manager of Panty Bar. 20 years later, I'm allowed to tell you that because I once asked him, can I say that? Can I tell people that? And he was like, sure. Well, I had to ask his boyfriend, and his boyfriend said. You know, it has become a thing that as treatments and stuff have changed, you have to renegotiate all of those things. I used to have like a 3-date rule, and that I would have to tell them 3 days, because the thing was, it certainly used to be the case that if you told them straight away, like on Grindr or something a few years ago, you were never, you know, they would just stop talking to you. You were never going to get to a first date, let alone a second one or whatever. But then if you left it, you know, a couple of dates too long, you know, then they'd often be annoyed that you hadn't told them. Or in my case, like once I was in, I think it was in the Dragon or something on this date, and I got up and went to the toilet, and when I came back, somebody else had told him.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was somebody that I didn't even know, like somebody I wouldn't have known from Adam.
Do you know why? Can you guess?
Well, I'm guessing because he was hot, probably. I mean, you know, but people are weird, you know, whatever. And or it was like one of those misguided, you know, one of those idiots who think, oh my God, he doesn't know, and he might get AIDS or whatever, you know. People are weird. So it's always been this kind of thing you have to feel your way through. I sort of gave up on the 3-date rule because everybody's different and every situation is different. And it has become easier, that part of it anyway, because more and more people do understand about treatments and everything nowadays. But you'll still get people who freak out about it. And it's still a really awkward and weird and horrible thing. I hate having to do it. I sometimes say that I would prefer to come out as gay, you know, over and over again than have to do that thing over again and constantly tell people. And partly because, you know, it's awkward, embarrassing, and annoying, right? But it's also partly because I live my life and I don't think of myself as somebody with HIV. I do not think of myself as somebody who's sick or diseased or infected with anything. I get up in the morning, I take that little pill, you know, in the same way that I brush my teeth. And sometimes after I think, did I take that pill? You know, in the way that did I brush my teeth? Because I do it on automatic pilot. So I don't think about it. I sometimes compare it to, I have a little tattoo on my back. And I got it when I was 18 and drunk. And I can't tell you now is it on the left or the right, because I can't see it. So I never think of myself as somebody who's tattooed until somebody says, oh, you have a tattoo. I think, oh, right, yeah, I do. And that's how I feel about HIV these days, with the advances in treatment and all. I don't think of myself as somebody who's infected or carrying a disease, you know, until every now and then I have to tell somebody because I'm dating them. And so in a way, I hate having to do it because it reminds me of this thing that actually I had grown to totally forget about. And so it annoys me for that reason.
So it appears we're kind of somewhat at odds as a community. There's one part of the community that, you know, is getting much, much better at having these conversations, but there are still people that are just like, too much, too anxious.
Yeah.
For our survival, I think we gravitate, because David was really inferring this, we gravitate, those of us who are POZ gravitate towards either like-minded people. I don't mean people who are all POZ, but we gravitate towards people both in terms of sort of sexual adventures and pickups and whatever, but also friendships where there is some sort of normalization of the process, you know, and it's as normal as what Rory's describing. And a perfect example of this is like last weekend, this guy who's fully aware of the fact that I'm POZ and everything else was insistent on me fucking wanting to. He really wanted me to fuck him without a rubber. And we ended up having a gas and quite funny conversation. It ended up being really hot afterwards. But I'll spare you all those details. But I thought it was quite amazing that here is a guy who was completely down with it, because actually how it started off was we were talking about the U equals U thing, and probably jumping the gun here in this conversation. Yeah, well, you can actually explain that, or let Dave explain. And I just thought, wow, finally, this is so refreshing. But I think there are people out there. I think, there are bigoted people, and there are people who are still medieval in their attitudes everywhere, and we still have to bring them with us. We still need to have the conversations, bring them with us, and diminish that bigotry. And I think it's, bit by bit, it's happening. I mean, events like this. The fact that you're all here is quite extraordinary. I mean, actually take a bow. I think it's quite remarkable. I mean, I know we're a fabulous, glamorous draw, but I think it's quite remarkable that we've 400 people in here.
There was free booze.
Because yeah, but it's...
That wasn't the only reason.
But it suggests to me that there's an urgency in these conversations. There's a demand amongst people to actually, first of all, apprise themselves of new knowledge and be part of a widening conversation around these topics. And I think that's really, really good.
I agree. And one of the things that, for me, marks a trajectory of us getting better and better is, there have been really encouraging figures from the UK. If you really break down the Irish figures over the last cycle, there have been some encouraging data points, but it's not a downward trend by any means yet. And as part of, that strategic toolkit and using a couple of different things to try and prevent new diagnoses, one of the things is PrEP, and this concept of U equals U. So David, do you want to explain what U equals U means?
Okay, I mentioned that we'd had a phenomenal reduction in HIV infections in a very big, very high-risk population. That's because of a number of things. It's not because anyone's wearing any more condoms than they used to. That's important to note. Although condoms are playing an enormous role in that. A lot of people are using them brilliantly. What we now do is when people are diagnosed HIV positive, we start them on treatment the same day, definitely within 2 weeks, but preferably the same day. And that's because when a person is taking treatment, taking their medicine, and they take it properly, something happens because we get an undetectable viral load. I myself have been taking my medicine really well for 15 plus 18 years, and since they were invented, and I've been undetectable all that time, which means I can't infect anyone else. If I had sex with any of you lucky people and I came inside your bum, forgive me, you can't catch it from me. But that's not how the doctor explained it to me. My doctor explained it to me that he said, you have an undetectable viral load, which means we can't detect any of the virus in your bloodstream. I was like, okay, thanks. It was all very wordy and stuff. At the time, I remember I told you already, I was running around having a lot of sex doing, did I say that already? I was being very promiscuous on chems and doing chem sex for a significant period of my life. And I wasn't always careful. I didn't always use condoms. And I did sometimes carry the guilt that maybe I was infecting other people. I wasn't. I was uninfectious all that time and I didn't even know what it meant. One of the tools that we use to end the epidemic is that nearly all, probably 70 to 80% plus people who are HIV positive, diagnosed and know it, are uninfectious. Most people catch HIV from someone who thinks they don't have it. So if I'm choosing online or in a bar who to go to bed with, if I choose the HIV positive person, or there's an HIV positive person, an HIV negative person, and I'm choosing on the basis of the safest in regard to HIV transmission, it's safer for me to have sex with the HIV positive person. Chances are he's undetectable. Chances are the person who's HIV negative could have caught it within the last year, didn't go and get tested because of stigma, and is highly infectious. So these are one of the tools. You probably all know that. I'm trying to wonder, I was wondering who's in the audience. Do you mind if I do the hand raise thing?
Do it.
How many people are health professionals? And other people are people who HIV and stigma has impacted their lives or their friends' lives or their community's lives?
Wow.
Okay.
Wow. How many are bottoms?
Last year,
You know, next time we'll put that as an option on the Eventbrite form just to make it a little bit easier afterwards.
Last year, a campaign began called U equals U, which means undetectable equals uninfectious. It's really, for the first time, many thousands of gay men around the world have been told that they have undetectable viral load. They didn't know that meant they're uninfectious. HIV negative people were scared to have sex with HIV positive people, even though they're uninfectious, because they didn't know that undetectable means you're uninfectious. So that campaign, a decade late, no criticism, has been phenomenal in changing stigma, because it means that if it's really absorbed by our communities, then HIV negative people are going to be a lot less frightened to have sex with HIV positive people.
And just touching on our community absorbing that fact, when we were planning this, and I've learned an awful lot in planning this event and reading up, I came across so many people that had no idea about an undetectable viral load.
Okay.
What do you guys think is the barrier for this specific community, which, like, on balance probably should know all of this? Like, what's the barrier to that message getting out? Why don't people know more?
Fear. I think that we cast your mind back, those older ones in the audience, to 1980, and yeah, I'm just being kind.
He's half blind.
It is that eye as well. That is the reason. AIDS was terrifying. It was terrifying. It was terrifying. People were dying in the millions.
Yeah.
We felt disease. We were dying. If somebody said to me, "Oh gosh, Dave, you lost a bit of weight," as a compliment, that would mean I'm dying. That's kind of how it absorbs. So I'm just saying that there is a generation, and some of that's filtered down to newer generations, of absolute fear around that thing. Try to deliver a message to a traumatized person that they're safe and they don't hear it. I know, because I'm a bit traumatized myself, but anyone that's been sexually assaulted in a violent way, 2 years later you try to tell them that they're safe, the trauma doesn't allow them to hear the message. We are a traumatized community by that HIV epidemic that killed us, frightened us, ruined our sex lives, made us slutty, promiscuous, disease-spreading, horrible people that the straight world hated. And now we're trying to be delivered a new message that we're safe, and we're just too traumatized to hear it, I think. But it is important that we keep delivering the message. It's important not just for HIV negative, for the heterosexual world to hear it, perhaps, so that stigma dies down. It's important that HIV negative people understand it, so that they don't see HIV positive people as frightening, infectious people. But it's really important for HIV positive people to hear this message too. Like me, I thought I was infectious, running around having sex when I was, and all the time I wasn't. And I never absorbed the message that I'm no danger to anyone. My sex is no danger or risk to anyone else.
But it's a complicated message to get across, because it's not simple. It's not saying, oh, there's a cure, it's all done. You have to explain to somebody what an undetectable viral load is, and the fact that it says an undetectable viral load, so it's, it needs to be explained properly, and it's not a simple thing. And so, for example, I see the posters around now, U equals U, undetectable viral load, and I know that 50% of the people who see the posters in the toilets in Panty Bar don't know what an undetectable viral load is. So you'd have to have somebody standing beside the poster explaining that to them. And I think they'll also have a little suspicion about it anyway, because if it's not a cure, then, they're not going to listen to all that, complicated stuff. It's not an easy message to get across, and most people aren't interested in listening to it anyway, because they don't want to talk about AIDS.
And also, I think it has to be, any conversation around PrEP has to be done in the wider context of, and I keep coming back to it.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there. Can you explain what PrEP is?
Pre-exposure prophylaxis. So that's essentially, we're talking about offering people a variety of triple combination therapy that will, when they take it, and they take it to a certain regimen, essentially prevents them from becoming infected. There's a whole load of other variables involved, but I think, all of any forms of medication, whether it's PrEP, or just regular antiretrovirals, has to be, they can't be seen as just sort of the panacea to all there is, in the same way that penicillin was, we imagine penicillin to be the problem solver to STIs back in the 70s, and now of course you've got pathogens that are resistant to it. It has to be done in the wider context of having conversations around how we look after each other, how we bodily integrity, how we respect ourselves, and how we respect other people, and how that plays out in the way we go off and get our end away. Or whatever.
PrEP is a single pill that any one of you could take. If I was infectious, I've explained I'm not infectious, okay? I want to absorb that information. But if I was, and I was going to come inside any of your bums, if you were taking PrEP, this one pill every day, you couldn't catch it from me. And that's how we're going to, that is an ingredient in how we're going to end the HIV epidemic.
And what's shocking, that message is starting, both health agencies around the world and governments up to quite recently have been reluctant to actually put that message out there for a myriad of reasons, because of cost factors, or because they just imagine that it's okay to just take this pill and simply abrogate any sort of responsibility around safer sex or whatever.
One of the things I'm picking up on is that there's a burden, and it's not that HIV necessarily is the burden, but it's a burden of disclosure, having to tell someone, having to explain. And I'm wondering, just to kind of measure the situation for you guys, what would it mean to you if every single negative person in our community was taking PrEP?
They'd be less frightened of me when I ask them on a date, go to bed with them. If I'm looking in their eyes and I'm seeing that, can I catch it from him? Can I catch it from him? Whether that's my paranoia or a reality, that would just vanish. I want a world like that. I want a sex life like that. I want a sex life.
The night is young. What would it mean to you guys?
Well, I have a wonderful sex life. Well, you know, especially in the beginning, there was a lot of discussion around PrEP, and a lot of gay people were saying, "Oh no, it's just like a whores. You know, we'll all be whores if you ever take PrEP." But if every single person in the gay community took PrEP for the next 10 years, the HIV epidemic would be over, because all of us old farts would have died, and there'd be no new infections. There isn't another condition, disease that I can think of where if there was a pill available to protect people from it, that people would have a problem with you taking it.
Well, that's not quite true, because we've dragged our feet over the HPV vaccine. When Mary Harney was Minister for Health, and they figured it was going to cost $3.5 million to inoculate every prepubescent girl in the country, the government, the last Fianna Fáil coalition, actually had to think about it. So we're not very good sometimes when it comes to ramping up public health.
I've been trying to get the HPV vaccine.
Public health strategies.
Honestly, I have.
It should be rolled out
again.
again.
Have to worry about
Totally.
cancer down there. So I was like, I want it, but it's not available.
Yeah.
I'd have to pay for it and all of that.
It would be a game changer.
Can I say something about stigma and PrEP too? Because just as a final example, I know I keep using sex metaphors with you tonight. Thank you. But if you were on PrEP, which means you can't catch HIV from me even if I was infectious. So me being uninfectious, having sex with you on PrEP, would you still, in the throes of sex or in the morning after, still think, but am I really safe? Am I really? That would be a reality for a lot of you, I think. That's how powerful stigma is.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to have sex with you again.
I want to touch on what our community is like right now, because, as I said, I've learned an awful lot. There's an awful lot that is literally incredible about how we are so ignorant and how we've been fed misinformation over time, and we're suffering from layers and layers of stigma that aren't really our fault. But there are new diagnoses every year in Ireland. There are hundreds of them. And I just wanted to get your sense on, as a community, why that keeps on happening.
If a young Irish man catches HIV tomorrow, and I think he will, you have more than one a day here?
Mm-hmm.
More than one a day.
Yeah. Well, then someone's going to catch HIV. And the reason you do it is exactly the same reason that I did 30 years ago. And we have all the medicine to end the epidemic. It's not about the medicine. The reason we catch HIV is because of stigma, fear, ignorance, because when we're in bed with someone and we're intimidated by them, we think they're amazing, we want them to like us. Don't see how ugly I really am. Please don't see how ugly I really am. I'm really bad at this sex thing. You're so amazing. Please like me. Please don't see through my facade. I'm not going to bring up the condom thing if you don't, because I need this to work so urgently. And that's why he's going to catch HIV tomorrow. Because the guy he's having sex with didn't come and get tested as often as he should because he's scared of becoming HIV positive or finding out that he might be because of the stigma. And that's how HIV is spread. And
Or they're about 20 and down in Mullingar and they've never picked up a copy of GCN, and they, it's all just, like, we've always been really good at shaming people for their sexual behaviours in this country, and that's one of the things that's always been so annoying about living with HIV. It's gotten much better, I'll say. But there was always that thing where people would be at you. Like, if ever I'm public about, in public somewhere talking about it, on Twitter people will start to, oh, but we're paying for your medication from our tax money, And I always say, okay, so like if you see a person in the wheelchair on the street, you run up and say, how did you get hit by a wheelchair, just in case that she, didn't look crossing the road, and then you say, oh, well, no, I'm paying for you, give me back that wheelchair, but they'll do that about HIV, and we used to do it about single mothers and that. Back in the 1950s, becoming a single mother was probably worse than catching HIV today. It was the end of a woman's life. She was going to end up in a fucking, a laundry and whatever. I mean, it was the end of a woman's life in this country, and yet lots of women in the 1950s became pregnant out of marriage. And they became pregnant out of marriage for the same reason that people today, end up not using condoms, and the reason that I, ended up catching HIV, because you're in the throes of passion, your hormones are going off and everything, your biology, your every hormone, your every cell, your millions of years of evolution have turned you into a person that is driven to have sex. All we are expected to do by our biology is to breathe, eat, and fuck. They are the three things that we are driven, every single one of us is driven to do. So to expect every single person to be able to just throw all that off and never, get wound up in the throes of passion is ridiculous. It's an impossible ask. So people will always, get STIs. People will always do things in the throes of passion that every single cell is driving them to do, and wagging your finger at them afterwards is, is pointless.
So, but we need to, I'd like us to feel that when we make those choices, we're more informed about it. When people decide, I'm not going to use a rubber, consciously decide not to use protection, whether it's to knowing that they might get pregnant, knowing they might get some box standard STI or HIV or whatever, that people are actually fully aware of the choices that they're making.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, people aren't aware of the ramifications, the implications of the choices that we make. I think that's really important. And they're not aware of it. They're not aware of it because a lot of the time it comes back to, again, what I keep saying, how we negotiate desire and intimacy. We're still sort of muddling around, sex.
I want to talk about trauma again too, because people who are traumatized don't make the right choices all the time. It's hard to care about yourself and the person you're having sex with and the choice you're making now in this sexual moment if you don't really care about yourself anyway. I have to say there's a hell of a lot of trauma amongst gay men, and that's partly being born out of the HIV epidemic that was fucking traumatizing and destroyed our sex lives, made it a risky endeavor. It's partly because there's so much societal homophobia, so much homophobia within the gay community too, internalized homophobia. There's so much bullying at school that a 14-year-old guy in Ireland today is going to have exactly the same experience in school that I had. Nothing's changed in that regard, nothing at all. And that is traumatizing, and we've got a hell of a lot of traumatized gay men on this sexual treadmill, which is not always a satisfactory one.
How do we combat that?
Well,
no pressure, but please solve
no,
it.
I believe I know. At 50 16th Street, I have a couple of jobs. One is to manage the chemsex clinics, and the other is the Dean Street Wellbeing Program. So PrEP is great, and getting people to have undetectable viral loads and getting them to take their medicine regularly and getting them to test regularly is all great, except it doesn't work unless people come to you. Our Dean Street Wellbeing Program says we can't address sexual health unless we talk about sexual well-being. I want to know, we've got these guys, we're a very busy clinic. It's kind of a sad story, but there's this sexual treadmill that people seem to get on. We have about 7,000 gay men coming to our clinic every month, and they're all telling the same kind of story. They're on this, if I'm sexy, I will be popular. If I'm sexy, I'll be on the right guest list. If I'm sexy, everything will work out on that dance floor. If I'm sexy, I'll pull the right guy. If I'm sexy, I won't be bullied. If I'm sexy, I won't be rejected online or in the nightclub. If I'm sexy, I will find love. If I'm sexy, everything will be okay. And everything in the gay culture tends to sort of support that. And what we're seeing at Dean Street is a whole lot of people that are just 10 years later falling off this treadmill, sometimes with an HIV diagnosis, sometimes with a drug problem. No skills to manage this online communication and Grindr stuff. And people who want people to sleep over with them after sex but are too scared to say so. People who don't feel sexy when they're in bed. I have to ask people when they last have sober sex, or if they're enjoying sober sex. Yeah, I have sober sex a lot. They say, I'm not one of those chemsex guys. I say, can you lie back and get a blowjob? I'm getting all sexy again. And you know, someone's giving you a blowjob and your mind just goes clear and you think, I'm enjoying this, I'm entitled to this, I can focus on a wet mouth on my dick and everything's okay. Or is there this tick-tock going on in your head of, what do I do in reciprocation? What do I look like in this position? How long do I stay like this for? Am I still hard? Oh my God, his finger's moving down to my ass. Am I douched? Can he see through my facade? Because I'm actually quite ugly, but he can't see it. Can he see through? How long do I stay in this position for? Who will be top? Who will be bottom? Well, how do I reciprocate? And if everything goes okay, if 2 erections maintain, if 2 orgasms happen within a reasonable time difference from each other, which you have to figure out as well, and if there is no rejection, and if they are lying in bed with no rejection, feeling okay after, they say, hi David, I had good sober sex. And I'm like, what? What in our community or online, what in your life made you think that was good sex? Yeah. We have to go right back to the fucking drawing board here.
Totally.
We need an understanding of what your sexual and emotional needs are, how to communicate them on these online platforms. You're trying to use emoticons to communicate your sexual and emotional needs, and 140 characters in some photoshopped image, and committing to having sex with someone before you've met them. And there they are falling off this treadmill in our clinic by the thousands. We're thinking we've got to go right back to sexual well-being. It's more than just testing and giving a medicine. We've got to go right back. Sorry, I interrupted.
And also to add to that, I mean, specific to Ireland, we only decriminalised our anti-gay laws, the old British laws, 24 years ago. So there's always been that aura of criminality that's informed our sexual our pleasure. You know, when you knew you could get 2 years in prison for holding hands in public or kissing in public, or 10 years in prison for intercourse, and it's this culture of criminality, it's just tainted, it's skewered the way actually we went out and looked for pleasure and the way we received pleasure, on top of all of those things that you've just described.
Sorry, I get all emotional when I could do that little thing.
That was good. There's an awful lot to unpack there, but one of the things you said was we need to go right back to the drawing board. And I'm conscious that one of the taglines we had for tonight was, we'll talk about HIV, stigma, and love. And if you could advise the ignorant, stigmatized, negative person out there who's scrolling through Grindr and sees somebody's username as POZ, or their status is bravely, honestly called out there as POZ, what advice do you give this kid who doesn't know anything in order to combat that stigma and save our community?
What do I tell the
what advice do you give
guy?
the negative guys? How can they arm themselves and be a little bit better and kinder?
Well, they can do a little reading. It's not hard to find out this information. All the information is out there. You just have to take an interest in it. And I appreciate, you know, when you're 19 or whatever, and you just want to run around the George and, you know, shag hairdressers, whatever. I appreciate that, you know, you don't want to have to pick up, you know, the boring parts of GCN and read about the, you know, the HIV treatments and stuff. But it's also part of being in this community. You are a member of a community, and you have to invest in it. And part of that is investing in the, you know, what came before you, the things that are involved in being a member of this community, the things that affect this community. So don't be a lazy prick. Do some reading, find out what the story is. Go to the clinic, get yourself tested. You know, if you go to the clinic to get yourself tested, all that information is sitting around you on the plastic chair while you're waiting for to give your bloody bloods. So you might as well read it. My advice is, you're a stakeholder in this community, act like one.
I think we do have to make good material for them to read that's readable and understandable. And what I'd say to him, if we're talking one-on-one, would be ask the people you're in bed with about it. Tell them you're nervous about it. Tell them you're ignorant about it. Tell them you're scared and there's things you don't know. Talk about it. What bothers me is we have guys coming to me and they say, I get nervous taking my clothes off with a stranger. I can't talk about HIV with my partners. That'll ruin everything. and they're telling me, and I'm glad they're telling me, but I said, why me? Tell the person you're in bed with. Tell your best friends. I think we need, I think what we need, our communities where our gay communities can be better is, I grew up in the culture where my gay scene offered me bars where I could watch a drag queen perform, never as good as you, and while I got drunk and looked for sex. And that was what we call a safe space, and that's not a fucking safe space as far as I'm concerned. That was a place where I learned how to be pro-essy about my bravado, about my sexuality, perform good sex, pick up skills, and I needed a safe space where the drag queen is hosting cabaret-style a discussion around stigma, a discussion around chems, a discussion around how to write my Grindr profile, rather than just running around looking for sex, acting like everything's fine, when I needed my safe spaces to be places where my heroes and leaders of the gay community were generating these dialogues. So I didn't have to just go to some leaflet in a health clinic to find out things. It was my community giving me the answers where I socialize.
Part of being a member of the community too is just simply about developing, at any age, developing just a greater sense of self-awareness about oneself. You know, and then that informs the choices we make and how we interact with people. I mean, when I came out in 1979, there were 4 VD clinics, as they were called, in Dublin, and they were grim unemployment exchange sort of style venues, and condoms were illegal, and information was really hard to get about STIs. But I very quickly, and I think it was because I sort of, like Rory was suggesting, because I invested something in this community I was a part of, that I decided, you know what, I want to go out and get my end away and have rockin' good sex, and as often as I can, as you want to do as you're 19, or even 29, or 39.
49.
But the thing is, to do that, you also just have to sort of develop a healthy sense of self and self-awareness because good sex is about actually feeling good about your sex, about yourself, and that's part of that is being mindful about going out and getting tested. If you're going to be sexually active, go out and get tested regularly, you know. It's just, I can't understand, it's a no-brainer. I can't understand people who imagine they can sort of sail through life getting their end away as furiously as possible and never imagine that there's some consequences to that. It's about looking after yourself, you know. So possibly we need to, as a community and as a society, we need to figure out, the messages have to be about as David mentioned in his sting, about greater love, about greater self-awareness, about greater self-respect. And when we respect ourselves, then other people respect us back and are informed by it.
Yes.
Artfully put.
I mean, stating the obvious.
Yes, beautifully though. Beautifully put.
I'm conscious that people have questions, so this is my last to you. If you could paint a picture, any picture of what great sex looks like for this community in the years ahead, what does it look like?
It looks like Zayn Malik and
Oh my God, yeah. And
Go on.
Zayn Malik
I'm there with you.
and Francois Sagat.
Francois Sagat, I get, for sure. Saint Malik. David.
I can tell you what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like coming to 5016 Street and saying, hello, can I have my gonorrhea medicine, please? I had the most amazing sex. I was doing all these chems. I was awake for 3 days. People are having sex with me that don't normally look at me. Oh my God, I passed out for 4 hours. They're still having sex with me, those dirty bastards. Listen, I need my gonorrhea medicine, please. Don't judge me, please, with your promiscuity, heteronormative stuff. This is normal for me. I've had sex like this before, but having sex like this again. I can have my medicine, please. No, don't clap, because that's what we're seeing every day in the tens and dozens. And we're almost too scared to say there's a consent issue going on there. Is this how you imagined your sex life? Do you have boundaries to know what you're worth? When you imagined your sex life, do you have the tools and skills, communication skills to know what your own sexual and emotional needs are and to make them happen in this weird climate that you're living in, post-AIDS, mid-AIDS, technology revolution, chems available everywhere. I know what good sex doesn't look like. It looks like that. And good sex, I think, means sitting down and stopping, maybe talking to a friend or if a health professional, and figuring out what your own sexual and emotional needs are, what makes you nervous, what makes you feel good, and then having the courage to take that forward with the right person in a climate where that's not normal. And that's what I want to support my community with.
Lovely. Being open.
Yeah.
That's it, being open. And all coming back to my gaff on Saturday.
I'm there.
Well, those of you with the beautiful skin.
And there are plenty of those. There are also probably plenty of those with questions. So, wow, front row.
I love this microphone so much.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to throw it to you, but then can you throw it back to me because I want to absolutely reef it up to the back as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, is this on? Thank you. Biohazard tattoo. Self-stigmatizing or a symbol of pride?
I think the person who has it tattooed has the right to make that decision. It can be either a hammer. Is it something you beat someone's skull in, or is it something you build a house with?
Yeah. I mean, listen, people can tattoo whatever they want. He's asking about, basically tattooing on yourself that you're HIV positive. To me, it's an unhealthy thing because... Yeah.
You want to explain what the biohazard symbol is about?
Huh?
The biohazard symbol.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What is it about?
I think you're explaining that.
Yeah, like it's telling the rest of the world that you're HIV positive, and some people are into that. To me, I don't want to stake my identity on something that happened, was accidentally happened to me along the way, and that doesn't affect me as who I am as a person. It's one thing about me, and these days, thankfully, it's a minor thing about me. So I wouldn't be into it. I don't want to stake my identity on that one minor thing about me. But whatever.
What do you think about it?
Why?
No, sorry. When I came out positive, that's the one thing that hit me over the head in terms of my identity. What does it mean to me? My toxicity of my blood. I come from a science background. I know what the symbol meant, in a technical sense. But that meaning to me as a young recently just changed over. That was just something that I even wrote a poem about it, but really, I've got a voice note that how that really affected me and isolated me. That for me was self-stigmatizing. I saw it in other people where they as a badge of pride, but it's a torturous journey because it goes for people it goes into sex behaviors and online dating, whether people want to breed people or not breed people, or that sort of that well-being aspect as well. So is it a self-identifying a symbol of pride and strength? Or is it time for a new symbol or new tattoo that represents a more positive, sex-positive approach?
I like that, yeah.
So maybe the symbol for electricity, POZ NEG.
Yeah.
Okay,
God, if I
thank you.
don't catch it now, Jesus. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, you, sir, on the aisle. Jesus, okay.
Oh.
Yay!
Thank you all for a very informative panel, and I'm really interested to discuss PrEP a bit more. It was very interesting to hear Rory say tonight that if everybody took PrEP for 10 years, perhaps we could get rid of this forever. I think there's a big question for a lot of people who are negative in should I be taking this or should I not be taking this drug? And why should I be putting a drug in my system? Should I not be sticking with safe sex? And I know some of this is kind of not discussed. We're not talking about it enough. And I think we should be a bit more open about that. So I just want to see if you can talk a little bit more about that, about why we should all be taking PrEP a bit more. Should we be taking PrEP, etc.?
We absolutely shouldn't be taking PrEP unless we're at risk of catching HIV. And that's figure-outable. Is that a word? Figure-outable?
Yeah.
If you go to your sexual health clinic and have that conversation, probably that is the best place to do it. They know best if someone comes in your eye every week, do you need PrEP? There's probably people in the room that don't know the answer to that. I mean, you wouldn't if they were infectious, would they? If they were uninfectious, would they? Best have this conversation with a health professional. Basically, we say, if you've had a condomless penis up your bum in the last 3 months, or are likely to again in the next 3 months, yeah, PrEP's perfect for you. And it is that simple.
Yeah, and it's applying it to a situation where, well, first of all, we have to dissuade ourselves of the notion that such a thing as safe sex exists. There's no such thing as safe sex. Actually, there is. It's no sex. Okay?
That's my sex.
It's safer sex. Once we concern ourselves with safer sex and we realize there's a sort of continuum of risk, then based on the risk, we apply the various meds or, you know, sort of preventative measures, whatever preventative measures are available to us.
Yeah, because I just want to point, I wasn't advocating that everybody take PrEP, but there was a hypothetical question, and in that hypothetical, all the people who should be taking PrEP would be would be given it. Yeah, so I think that's up for everybody to know their own sexual behaviour and whatever happens to them. You'll know yourself, surely, whether you have occasionally ended up having unsafe sex and whether maybe PrEP might be good for you. And you look like a slut, so.
Thank you very much.
Hi. Just
That's the win.
I'm single.
one of the things that hasn't been discussed this evening is money and how these things are actually funded. As we know, PrEP isn't available in Ireland unless you pay a lot of money or in a position of financial privilege. And the things that you're talking about in terms of, you know, consent awareness, public awareness for HIV through the Department of Health or HSE, which is pretty much non-existent, and those conversations that need to be funded at a government and healthcare provision level. And that's happening, you know, the rise in HIV is happening at a time where the LGBT community has depleting lobbying power in the vacuum after Glen. And so I'm just wondering what you think about how the community can actually come together to affect that kind of change that needs to happen at a very high level for these things to become realised and become funded by people who, for the most part, have no idea how to enter this conversation in many ways.
Well, we saw ACT UP did a protest outside the forecourts there last week because Gilead were applying. Gilead, who produced Truvada, which is PrEP, Gilead were applying to challenge an appeal against the extension of their patent. Because, of course, a couple of countries in Europe around the world, only a small number of countries, have actually licensed a sort of a non-generic version of Truvada. And they're doing it, of course, because, of course, it's got massive cost implications. There's a couple of things where I think government should be pressurizing Big Pharma to actually, especially when drugs go out of patent, or there's attempts to actually extend that patent, and Gilead are trying to extend it to 2020. It's shocking. I mean, it's just greedy on their part. So I think direct action groups like ACT UP require all our support. People should actually be signing up to get involved. There's nothing that works better than direct action, shaming people like Simon Harris. I think some of the various well, you've got agitprop groups like ACT UP Dublin, but then you've got other various groups campaigning. Some of them have been around for a long time, like HIV Ireland or Gay Health Network, which I'm a director of. I mean, we're always looking for people to be involved, actually, just to renew the energy and the activism. And I think these organisations have a huge role to play in being a voice for our community and putting it up to sometimes governments that's reluctant to stand up to Big Pharma, or simply is just so ignorant and unaware of the issues at hand that they actually need to be educated into the process. I'd like to think that our government is a bit more ahead of the curve, but I'm not sure I see much evidence of that, actually. In fact, I don't see any evidence of that.
Well, of course, the No Now campaign went on hiatus because after Glen had its troubles because they ran out of funding and had to go scrambling around looking for funding. So money's always going to be an issue. Maybe Adam could answer that.
And of course, the other thing too is You know, I mean, I'm a Dubliner living down in Clonmel for the last 10 years, and I rail against Dublin centricity. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary. You know, people up here can be comfortable in their little bubble that we've got sort of rapid testing in Pantybar, rapid testing in some other gay, LGBT-friendly bar or whatever. But down the country, there's shite fuck all of those sort of resources. It's really, and I don't live in the country. I mean, I live in an urban centre of 19,000 people, and it's just a smaller version of Dublin, Clonmel.
You keep telling yourself that.
Adam, do you want to add anything to that? If you want to throw down the mic a little bit. Maybe introduce yourself and what you do for the people who don't know.
Yeah, my name is Adam Shanley. I run the Know Now Rapid HIV Testing Project, and I also work with the HSE on any of their men who have sex with men campaigns, or any kind of the touch points that they have in terms of men who have sex with men. And it is a huge problem. Anytime I've ever gone with any sort of an idea or any sort of an intervention or any sort of a prevention idea or anything to do with sexual health and HIV, I've had nodding heads and that sounds great, and it always comes down to funding. With the rapid HIV testing, it was a really, really hard uphill battle for us to be able to secure that funding, and it was through the expertise that is now unfortunately lost through Glenn that we were able to secure that. But even when Glenn had kind of wound down, we were in a really difficult scramble to find how we would be able to get funding and continue the project. The only reason we were able to continue the project was because we had 6 months of some really solid data, which showed that of all of the guys who tested with us, for 50% of them, it was the first time that they'd ever had a HIV test, which is incredible to hear that that's still something that could be possible. And that kind of won over, I guess, the medical decision makers to put the pressure on the kind of fund holders. That's one example of being able to, you know, to get the funding, prove it works, and then get the funding continued. But I think one of the and anytime I kind of talk about this, I always put forward the fact that we have a real lack of political will to do anything about this. When we look at Leo Varadkar at Dublin Pride and him being able to say with a hat tip to act up, you know, now is the time for us to act up about our sexual health, and then silence. He went to Canada and with Justin Trudeau to get some of the cred, was able to say that sexual health was one of his main priorities. I mean, we're back in session and there's not a huge amount that I've heard or seen Leo Varadkar do in that sense. And Simon Harris, which I think has been demonstrated quite well in the artwork of Will St. Ledger and Act Up about Silent Harris. Since he took up the post, he's not once spoken about gay men's sexual health. He's not once spoken about HIV, which is a massive indictment to his position as Minister for Health. So I think... I think the reality is that, you know, the fact that we have this auditorium full today shows that there's an interest in making a change about that. And we've done it before. We've been able to rally together and use our pressure to create change. And I think we need to do that by joining groups like ACT UP, joining groups like the Gay Health Network, or not even joining a group, but, you know, taking either to the streets or to your emails and raising this issue that this shouldn't continue.
Can I just say, shout out to Una and the other lesbians who came along tonight, because this is really above and beyond the call of duty for the community. And in response, all of us gays are going to go to the next cervical cancer discussion. I know you may not be lesbian, but I'm just using that as a term.
They look like lesbians.
Yeah, well,
anyone else? Adam, you're going to have to throw that over there to that lovely man with the...
Ooh! Whoa.
Adam, we might not get you to do the next one.
Hi, just in terms of what Adam said, the question, I suppose, is that is it our failure as activists that has contributed to the significant rise over many, many generations of the positive figures in Ireland? And where have we gone wrong, and how do we correct that? Because this problem hasn't just arisen. It's been here for the last 35, 40 years, in fact. And I think they'll always turn a deaf ear to our kind of pleas if they're not loud enough, strategic enough, and focused enough.
Good question.
Never think that you're failure. It's a phenomenal success that these two are here alive today, and lots of other people in the audience. Never ever think that. There's challenges, we can always do more. What you're ringing bells with me is I've been boasting about our 80% reduction in HIV infections. I can't boast because, let's look a little more closely. Part of that is a lot of people are buying PrEP online. Nearly all of those people buying PrEP online are white gay men who have the wherewithal and the money to keep their credit cards up to date, to go out every month, care about themselves enough, prioritize this, buy the PrEP and be at home when it's delivered. There's a whole lot of people in the throes of addiction, mental health, poverty that can't do that. If we don't seriously address that right now, we're going to have in London an HIV epidemic that's entirely focused on poor mental health black gay men. And it's back to you, because we can enjoy our successes, and there's so many of them. And in regard to HIV, we're battling societal, sexual, moral, all kinds of shit that it's impossible to deal with an HIV epidemic. It's one of the most complicated infections, diseases. It's about moral stigma and disease, and medicines are invented, and then there's politics with Gilead and services making them completely out of price range for the general public. So we're never failing, where it's amazing what we're doing, phenomenal, but we have to keep on looking for those gaps.
I'm taking the microphone from him. He didn't have to throw it to me, which is good, because I catch like a gay. I've been editing GCM for 14 years, and in those 14 years, one of the ways that we have measured how things have changed is the profile of our advertisers. Who will advertise with us, and who will answer our calls when we're looking for ads. And for all of those years, we've done coverage of HIV issues, and we've had ongoing columns from different people who've been HIV positive. And consistently, advertisers have not wanted to advertise beside those pages, the boring pages in GCM. And so, but we've noticed over the last year or so that is completely changing. That people are, they're not calling up and asking can they be on beside those pages, but they're not complaining that they are saying that they don't want to be placed near those pages. And so I'm recognizing that as a kind of sea change, really, in terms of how the wider society is viewing HIV and the issues that surround it. And for me, personally looking at it, I think it has kind of come along at the same time as the introduction of PrEP. Because I think that gay men are seeing their sexuality in a different way, because PrEP frees them to be sexual beings. And so the stigma of their sex and sexuality is changing. But I wonder what the panel would do. Do you see, well, I think the fact that everyone's here is part of that sea change, or a growing sea change, and ACT UP and people becoming involved in activism again around HIV. So I just wonder what the panel think. Do they see that sea change, or am I imagining it?
I'll give you a clear example of how I see that sea change. My first journalist job in Out magazine, Ireland's first commercial mag, before we set up GCN, ran from 84 to 88. And the second last issue, we put in a full-page safer sex ad. This is at the height of the AIDS crisis, and rubbers are still illegal. We put in a full-page ad with a black and white photograph of two men in a clinch. No erections or anything. They were smiling. You didn't know what they were doing, but they were just together. It was sort of an abstract black and white graphic of the two men. But next to it, of course, was information about sucking and fucking and everything else. And the printers, the Carlow and Leinster Times, refused to print the magazine. And actually, it had a knock-on, a domino effect on the magazine, because by the time we scrambled to get another printers, we eventually got the Kerryman. They were great. By the time the Kerryman came on board and then reprinted it, advertisers were pissed off because we were out of date. The news, most of the content was out of date, especially the time-specific content was out of date. And the magazine fell apart, actually. Ireland's first and only commercial, semi-commercial gay magazine, all because of the bigotry of the printers, who were, and I mean, it was quite extraordinary. Here we are trying to do something good for ourselves, being responsible. But of course, it was in the context of sex between men being illegal as well. So, for me, we have moved on hugely in the last 30 years.
But I think there has been a sea change in the last couple of years too. This event is one of them. A sign of that. We are sitting here talking about butt fucking in Google.
And we're
quite
very proud
honestly,
to have
I know
you.
Google's all very, progressive and all that, but quite honestly, 4 years ago, we wouldn't have been. I, do a lot of these kind of diversity things, with big companies and that. And, for the first few years, it was all Googles and Facebooks and Airbnb, those pricks. I'm kidding. And all of that. And then in the last couple of years, certainly since the marriage referendum especially too, now it's Visa and, banks and accountancy firms. And that's part of the same sea change. There's been a change in attitudes to the gays and a knock-on effect and change in attitudes, tied up with PrEP and all that too, I'm sure, to HIV. And yeah, great. I'm all for it. Paid for all my Christmas presents.
Nice one. We're going to have time for one final question, and I'm going to just tag Will St. Ledger down here, if that's okay, because he links to what happens next.
Thanks very much. First of all, I want to thank you for coming along. It's great to see finally some true, real conversations about the things we need to talk about. I want to pay tribute to Rory and for one thing in particular, AMI has to be part of this conversation we've had about HIV awareness and raising money for HIV in the last years. And
you're going to have to just explain what AMI
sorry, Alternative Miss Ireland, which is
an annual fundraiser that ran for 20 years, raising funds for HIV and AIDS charities.
That was a board.
There were 20 of us involved, by the way. He was just a mouthpiece.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just the pretty one.
But my main point is, I keep it short. We have, in 2006, for instance, there was, the figures were 60 gay and bisexual men who were diagnosed with HIV, new diagnosis. Last year, we're looking at 289. Those people who are being clinically looked after, they're given them positive diagnosis, they're being given the medication, and they're told things like U equals U and all those messages. But there is simply nowhere for them to go to talk to each other, nowhere. And the reason I raise AMI is because AMI regularly give money from its fundraising to Open Heart House, to Corda. I know Corda are still there, they're going in a different direction. But literally today, if you got a new diagnosis, you would wait maybe about 2 or 3 weeks, I think, to see somebody, a social worker or something like that. But there is no space and no place for people who received a diagnosis, or anyone who's living with HIV, to meet other people and to talk about it. And I think that is a huge, it's a missing gap in terms of the community when we're talking about the community side of it. That's all I wanted to say. Community.
Yeah.
I'm really genuinely, you can keep that for now because I definitely won't be able to catch it twice. I'm really sorry that we don't have time for more questions, but do you guys have anything to add before I wrap things up?
Just that I've been talking again about how reducing HIV infections and about medicine and engagement and undetectable viral loads, but most important message I think is you do it. Every time that you wear a condom, every time that you go and inquire about PrEP, every time you make a mistake and go and get PEP, every time you are kinder to someone on Grindr, every time you call out stigma on Grindr, or racial rejections, or femme rejections. Every time your mate is being a real dick and doing too many chems and annoying, but you're sympathetic and kind towards him and nurture him towards better health. Ending the HIV epidemic is not just about the clinics and the medicine, it's us, it's what we do in our bedrooms and online. So remember that, you end the epidemic, we do that.
Okay, so for our part, for InterTech's part, we want to thank you for coming. I just want to mention one thing, and it's about how we solicit support in these tech companies. You know, when you go to a diversity manager or head of diversity for Europe or something like that, and you say, listen, we want to do an event, and we want to make it meaningful, and we want to talk about HIV and stigma and love. One of those typical questions they ask is they lean back and they say, what are the success factors for you? And I guess when we were talking about it, we said, okay, well, we'd love somebody to walk out of the auditorium and go, wow, there's so many more people I could date now that I didn't know beforehand, which I think would be really nice. Second thing is we'd love somebody to walk out and be able to start a conversation, not have it with all of the professionalism that you've seen here tonight and all of the experience, but at least start it or continue one that they've been having for a while with friends. And the last point was the success factor that I don't think we expected tonight, which was almost selling out. There are over 300 people here tonight, and just turning up is a really big deal when you're dealing with something as difficult as this to discuss. So please, a round of applause for yourselves. And with the wrap-up comes thanks, so bear with me because these are heartfelt. A 20-year-old grad from NCAD, which is the National College of Art and Design in Dublin, put together all of these images and everything that you saw outside and facilitated all of the social media campaigns. And we think he's great, and his name is Connor Foran. We'd like to thank him. The production team who've been sending me little secret messages on the screen about timing and trying to keep us on track. Robin and Connor and co, thanks so much. These fucking fabulous men. And yes, two good points to finish on. Number one, Rory O'Neill is spotting 50 people a glass of Prosecco each.
Oh, I am.
The look of shock in your eyes. I already have the vouchers. So myself and Daniel Toth, beautiful Hungarian man in the front row, you can find, he's taken, sorry Julian, he's taken by another beautiful French man. Yeah, so you can find myself or himself before you leave here if you'll come with us to Panty Bar for a little bit of an after party and maybe a boogie. And then finally, ACT UP. So this guy, Will St. Ledger, is involved in an organization called ACT UP. And yesterday they contacted us with a video that they had produced called Love and Suppression. And it features Robbie Lawler and his partner. And it is absolutely beautiful. And there is wine left, and we are going to go upstairs and watch that 5-minute video and finish off the wine and then head to Panty Bar. How does that sound?